Hi everyone, this is Praveen Kumar from Informatica Global Customer Support, and in this video we are going to have a quick walkthrough of the data integration service startup issues. So the agenda for this video is as shown on the screen. First we'll have basic understanding of the DIS overview so that every one of us is aware of all the basic functionalities of the DIS, and we'll also have a look at where the logs can be found for the DIS, and we will go through an overview of the common startup issues, and then we will have a quick detail understanding of certain common issues which we have been noticing around the product, and there will be a troubleshooting guideline, and we'll at the end have a references to the various KB articles that have been used in this video. So the data integration service is basically an application service in the Informatica domain. It performs the data integration tasks on behalf of the analyst tool, developer tool, and also the InfraCMD, and it can also perform for the request that comes from external clients. So what would the data integration services do? So data integration service is basically a engine, or you can say a set of engines which actually can perform various kind of execution of jobs on behalf of the request that comes from various clients. Few of the clients, as we discussed, was the analyst tool, the developer tool, and InfraCMD, and you would also find uh, the request also comes from third-party external clients as well, and also we can get it from a SOAP UI. So how does it perform is it fetches the metadata from the MRS and loads the metadata into an execution engine, and the execution engine takes care of executing it. Now what all things the data integration service can run? The data integration service can run mappings. It includes even your data viewer, right? And then you have profiles, drilling down on the profiles, scorecard execution. So all those things are considered as part of the profiles in this slide though. Then we have workflows. So in the workflows there might be notification tasks, there will be mail tasks, there will be gateway tasks. All those tasks inside the workflows are executed by the DIS. And web services, you might have a web service producer in DIS, and you can use DIS as a web service in your client applications, and you can send a SOAP request and expect a SOAP response after the execution of your corresponding mapping that has been configured under the web service. Similarly, we have a SQL data service where the user can create virtual tables to create the logical tables which can span across different kinds of databases also. So SQL data service is a functionality provided by DIS where you can deploy a mapping which can actually get its sources and perform transformation task on a data, and users can actually query on the output of the mapping seamlessly as though it is a in fact it would behave like a normal database table, right? So that is what the virtual table, and we do have ODBC drivers with which you can connect. You have JDBC drivers and ODBC drivers with which you can connect to the SQL data service. Now coming to the dependency, the MRS is one service on which the DIS definitely depends on. Of course, it also depends on the node which would bring it up, but MRS has a functionality dependency because DIS cannot run without any metadata, and the metadata has to come from the MRS. There is an optional dependency on the stat MRS. When I say optional dependency, it's not because of the it would stop running the jobs or it would not come up, but it would need stat MRS in order to ensure that the status of the jobs is updated so the users can use the monitoring tab to monitor them. So here are the set of logs which you can find in the file system as well as in the domain logs, with which we can actually debug any kind of startup issues and even other functional level issues with respect to DIS. So the most important log are the first two and the fourth one. Okay, so the first one is the data integration service logs. So it is in infahome/logs/ the node name followed by services in data integration services/dis logs, and in that you will see dis underscore the dis name underscore the node name dot log. So the node name is added because you can also run your dis on grid, and in that case if you are sharing your log file system then the logs would be overwritten. So that's why there is a separate node name suffix added, and the x at the end means a number from 0 to 9, where 0 is the latest log entry. So you can see the example here. My home is infra/home. In that I have logs directory. In that I have my node name, which is node 01 slash services slash data integration service slash dis underscore demo dis. Now dis, the small dis is actually prefix for all the dises, and then you have demo dis, then the node name, and then the log.0. Similarly, you can get the admin console logs also using the export logs utility provided by the admin console. However, the the difference between those two logs is the admin console log is convenient to access, whereas the uh, file system log is more detailed and does not have any truncated stacks. So you would find the details stack in the file system based service log, whereas you would find more user friendly and accessible messages in the admin console. So Informatica requests both of them, or we would expect at least the first one, because the service log would also include the details which are present in the admin console's DIS log. And another benefit of using the service logs from the admin console is it also renders the messages from all the DIS logs into one. Yeah, I mean, if you are running a DIS on grid and on multiple nodes are actually writing, so your DIS log would be a combination of all those logs which the each DIS is logging. Then we have domain logs. This is very much needed because we are discussing here about the startup issue, and the startup issue, if there is a failure in triggering the Java itself, then you would definitely face the problem you will definitely face the problem where you will have to resolve the Java triggering, why the Java is not able to trigger and the Java process. Now this Java process would have command line arguments, and so if there is anything wrong in the command line arguments, it would be logged in the domain logs. So that is the starting point. If you do not find any of your logs getting updated, that's the first place you should look for. Then comes the JSF communication logs. So the DIS itself is a server, and it listens on connections over a B port, and any communication that happens, and if there is any information about those connections to be logged, that would go into the DIS name underscore JSF log in the node name services data integration service folder. You can see the example which I have provided, which is in infahome logs node 01 slash services data integration service slash demo underscore dis underscore jsf dot log. Coming to the fifth one, it is a Tomcat log. So although DIS is an Informatica process and it's a Java process, it internally has a Tomcat inside it. So and the DIS starts up with the deployment of those web applications which are present in the services slash data integration service web apps folder. So so whenever we try to access the uh, DIS, we are actually accessing the HTTP part is actually controlled by the Tomcat, and the Tomcat writes its log into the Catalina file, which is shown on the screen, and you need to look for the latest date log for all the logs of that particular day for the latest error. So the date is the way we will find multiple Catalina date.log in your data integration service folder, and you would find all the attempts made for today would be present in the same file, which would be Catalina today's date.log. Okay, right. So let's have a quick walkthrough of our overview of this particular DIS startup issues which we have seen multiple customers facing. So we can broadly categorize them as these 7 categories: MRS misconfiguration, port issues, file system issues, grid startup, workflow issues, job queue issues, and metadata corruption issues. So so before this, I would also recommend users to actually go through this ref KB article 515752, which has some important messages of DIS startup getting logged. Yeah, we will also go through the KB article after this slide, but I would like to bring it brief overview of these issues which I have just shortlisted. The MRS misconfiguration is where details of the MRS are not properly configured, user is not valid, or the particular user is not valid, or that particular MRS does not exist, or is not available, or is not accessible, right? And port issues, so DIS actually uses a HTTP port as well as a beep port, and since it's a Tomcat, it also has a Tomcat shutdown port. So all these 3 ports should be available for the DIS to function properly. Then we have a file system issue, where disk space and these kind of issues should be dealt. Then there's a grid startup issue. So grid is, when we say grid, we DIS would be running in an active mode, and what it means is the DIS service would be 1, but it will have X number of service process, which is equal to the number of nodes running in the grid. And the DIS process of each node can actually take certain load from the master DIS. So whenever a DIS is running on grid, there is a master DIS which is also a DIS process among them, but it has additional capability of load balancing, of dispatching uh, the workload to the worker DIS. Then we have workflow issues. So these are some common known issues which we have come across, and we are trying to provide a quick understanding of those problems which we have seen, and quick solutions if at all it helps out in your cases. Then there is a job queue issue. Job queue is a new feature introduced in latest 10.1.x version, and there have been certain issues with that, and those issues we are actually going to discuss here. Then there is a metadata corruption issue, wherein because the DIS completely depends on the MRS for its metadata, anything wrong in the metadata of the MRS ends up with a inconsistent behavior of the DIS, and that can also be sometimes in case of a startup issue as well. And we will also let's have a look at this new KB article 515752 to understand some common basic messages you should know for a normal DIS startup. So as you can see in this screen. So this is the message you would be looking for. This will be the beginning, the first message, which talks about the deployment of the web application, and then you can see there is a data integration service started in XXX milliseconds and repository loaded, and after this the application starts loading the metadata of the DIS first, and then the DIS actually starts loading the metadata for the applications and starting each of those applications. So repository loaded in XXX milliseconds is the time you would see for a proper DIS startup. After this, there could be, if you have workflows enabled, workflow engine is enabled, then you would also see workflow engines initialized started messages as well. Okay, so yeah, so let's let's go back to the presentation now. Yeah, so MRS configuration. So the credentials you provide for an MRS interaction when you are creating the DIS are in the DIS properties, DIS service properties in the admin console. You need to ensure that the user credentials are valid, and the user should have sufficient privileges, especially the create project privilege is needed, because DIS would create its own projects inside the MRS internally, and it would also need to have the MRS should be up and running for the DIS to be functional. So that is an important point to note, right? So then there is port issues. So as I already told, there is a HTTP port needed for by default it is 8085, wherein you can actually configure it in the service process page of the in the admin console. If you are configuring web services, then you would need to use this HTTP port. And another part is you might want to enable security on your HTTP port. In that case, you would enable HTTPS, and in that case, you would be providing a key store file. Now, the HTTP port, the HTTPS port, and the key store file are supposed to be present and available. So the HTTP port and the HTTPS port, they should be dedicated for DIS only. We cannot share those with other processes or applications as well. And key store file which you are using for the HTTPS should be certified and should be present and valid, accessible to the Tomcat process which is running the DIS. The port range full. So apart from these ports, the DIS would also take its own beep port for communicating over beep protocol, and to use that port, it would pick up one of the ports provided in the ports range of the node where it is running. So in the node properties, you will find a min and max range, and you have to ensure that number of ports is sufficient and they are dedicated for Informatica only and not shared with any other application or product in your systems. And check for no orphan processes from the previous startup is running. That can also cause a port from still being listening even the process is not active, but the process is running. That's where the where the OS would still keep the port available for the process, and uh, having such orphan process is not a valid consistent scenario. However, in case you might find some orphan processes, you can actually go ahead and kill them. The way you can find out that it's an orphan process is by checking that it is not a node process and its parent is 1. Similarly, we come to the file system issues. So the file systems, the DIS basically would need access to these directories which has been shown on the screen. It should have read and write access to infahome logs directory where it is writing the logs, and also it needs to have read write permissions to the work directory which is used by it, and then there are other folders like dis temp and cache. They might not cause fatal errors immediately but for the startup, but they would still be needed because else the behavior of the dis would not be consistent. We have the space issues which you can look for, where you might have end up with disk space or you have reached your u limit for the user, and jars missing. This is another scenario where we commonly see with new setups or upgraded setups where they did the installation and some of the jars would have not got properly untarred or unzipped from the installer and ended up with a corrupted installation. The only way would be to reinstall the binaries or copy it from some other installation. And we have another issue which we can have a look, where um, a case where certain folders in customer's environment were deleted accidentally by some user, and one scenario like that can be seen here, attachment folder missing. So so in the data integration services, in the services folder, the infra home services data integration service, there is an attachment folder. User had accidentally deleted this folder and they were not able to bring up the dis because of that, and the kb refers to that issue and has a solution for that. So ideally the solution is nothing, you need to get those files from other setup or from the installer itself. Grid startup issue. So in grid startup issue, the most important part is you first need to ensure that you have a shared file system when you are working with grid, so that your logs are consistent and the behavior of the grid is also consistent. Secondly, we have seen some slowness. We have seen some issues where customers have ended up not able to bring their dis on grid when they have too many applications, um, and the scenario is as follows. So whenever so when the master gateway comes up and it finds out the nodes for the dis are available for the grid, it would choose one of the nodes, one of the dis processes to become master, and then this dis master would do handshake with the non-worker or non-masters. So since the ISP, the node, has actually nominated this dis as to become master, it gives it a specific amount of time to declare itself as master after initializing all of the dis properties and set of operations to be performed between that. If this set of operations and the initialization takes more than 15 minutes, the node, the master gateway node, would initiate a kill on the master dis and would nominate some other node to become the master dis. And what would eventually happen is, even if the issue is not with the binaries but the issue is not node specific, if the no issue is with respect to the delay from the db or something like that area, then eventually the dis would never come up on any node when they are on grid. So um, the only way to figure out is bring up the dis on a single node and look up for the repository loaded in xxx milliseconds. You would come to know the amount of time it took on a single node. It is required to be almost the same time when even when it runs in grid. So you need to ensure that you set um, your process termination timeout property to 60. Suppose it would allow 30 minutes for the dis master to become master. That is the functional behavior. The default value is 30. We are doubling it in the slide, but the value you have to choose may not be 60. Actually, it might be based on how much time it is spending in the repository loaded operation there. And on top of it, there is definitely a need for tuning up your mrs db for different various index issues. Okay, and another important thing would be the MRS index recreation. So there is another thing which you can do is go ahead and delete and recreate your MRS indexes, which would make the access to the MRS fast. When DIS is coming up, it uses bulk calls to the MRS, and those bulk calls would not trigger if the MRS indexes are corrupted, and it would take a long time to return with those MRS and then fire back the query to the database on the other side. Similarly, we have a workflow engine issue. So workflow engine issue is when your applications are loaded, your DIS has come up, but you are not able to run the any workflows, and you would see the message as shown on the screenshot, the clipped screenshot on the screen, right? So you would observe that uh, the workflow engine starts, but it does not allow you the starting process never completes. We see the initialize message, and but we never get the started message, and that is where the problem is. And this happens due to an abrupt termination of the DIS at times, and a possible workaround is to recreate the workflow DB contents, because that is where most likely the corruption goes into. But um, this issue has been fixed in 10.2.0, and if you are facing this issue on any version higher than 10.2.0, then reach out to GCS, Global Customer Support Informatica, and we will assist you there. Similarly, we have a job queue issue. So before we discuss these issues, let us understand what is a job queue. So in recent versions, DIS has been added one feature where it will have the jobs are actually queued into a file system based queue, which can help in case of abnormal or abrupt termination of the DIS. And we have seen issues with the job queue getting corrupted and causing a few set of startup issues, and that's what these are the two common issues we have seen and their solutions in the referred KB. Okay, so basically job queue is whenever a DIS gets a request to execute a job, it would not only execute the job, but it also log it into a queue which is file system based, and the entry would be deleted after the execution is over. However, if the DIS terminates or for some reason the status of the job is not updated, uh, when the DIS fails over or the DIS resumes its point, it can actually figure out what requests were in progress, and it could refer the file system based job queue to access it. And that job queue is created in the cache directory, which is a configurable property in the DIS properties. Now, the corruption of these file system based job queue was causing issue for certain customers, and we have worked on them. And two common issues are where you will see a null pointer exception coming when a job tries to access the queue, and the common scenario is the most common root cause is probably the queue was corrupted, and the 526854 is a KB article which has a solution for this issue. And then we have something called array index out of bound exception also, which can come when a mapping is requested to execute. The DIS would come up, but when a mapping is being executed, it would fail with the rejected execution exception, and the root cause of that rejected execution exception is found to be an array index out of bound exception, which comes when reading the job queue file. This is also again relates to a queue corruption, and the solution is in 533559 KB articles. So similarly, we have an application issue now. So application issue, when we say, we mean the deployed applications. So startup issues which can be because of the deployed applications. So one scenario is slow startup issue, which we already discussed for the grid scenario, is the same one here. However, it would take further long time for you, even in a non-grid setup, and it we have multiple times we have been working with customers, and the ultimate solution has been by optimizing the databases to ensure a healthy execution of the queries. So adding up of few indexes and recreating of certain indexes on the database side has resolved the issue. On top of it, the DIS uses bulk calls to the MRS, and in turn MRS has something called as MRS indexes, which is again a file system based indexing present in the same server where the MRS is running. This is a configurable property in the MRS process tab. You can see the properties over there. What we have to do is this bulk calls from the DIS is not treated as bulk when the caches, the search indexes of MRS are corrupted. Okay, now the solution for this was to recreate the MRS indexes. You will get more details about these MRS indexes and when to recreate them in the article 527468, and that is where you will have to ensure that the MRS side is not actually causing slowness. Along with that, the DB side is of course a major bottleneck, and ensuring that your DB is strongly connected, or the network between your DIS, your MRS and your MRS DB has to be quick enough, and also ensure that your MRS JVM options has proper tuning of the memory allocation as well. So ensure that the XMX value or out of memory errors are not coming in your setup for the MRS at times. Application metadata corruption issue. So this is something a corner case, but it can still happen. So if there is any kind of corruptions, the best way is to ensure that you restore from the latest valid backup which you have, and share the domain backup and the MRS backup to GCS, so that we can investigate further on the corruption and get back to you with some solution analysis on that one. Now coming back to the troubleshooting guideline, how you would actually quickly debug. These are not expert tips. These are just a sensible tips which can easily help you to narrow down certain issues even without the help of global customer support. So refer the logs thoroughly for errors. Okay, so any fatal error is a error which can stop the DIS from coming up, and it can be in any of those 5 set of logs which we have shared in the second slide. Ensure that the process is up or goes down to isolate a startup hang or a startup failure. So there's you might already know that there are 3 different ways it can happen. The Java process comes and immediately goes off. Then second one scenario is where it comes up, stays for a certain time and then goes off. Then third scenario would be where it uh, comes up and hangs but never gets initialized, and that is a startup hang. So we would need to see whether the process is up and running. So the way to find out DIS, the way to find out that is just by ensuring that the PPID of the process of DIS is actually a node. Okay, and you should see the process is running, and if the process is continuously running for some time, you can actually collect JSTAGs and do further analysis on what actually the process is doing. However, you can involve Informatica support in those scenarios where it's a hang, but for a failure we would expect it has to log the details of the error. Now there could be a scenario where the all the logs would not get updated, but you should at least find some message in the domain log, even if the Java is not getting triggered or file system for the execution of the particular process is not present in the file system. Okay. Similarly, we request users to take regular domain and MRS backups, which can help a lot in case of down scenarios, and can actually end up coming up with a quicker solution, while you can share the corrupted backups to us for root cause analysis, and meanwhile keeping up your systems up and running. Setting up the XMX JVM process appropriately is very much important to avoid out of memory errors. Your needs might not be based, so the product comes with some default settings of Java XMX and different XSS and also XMS. However, they might not be the optimal values for your environment. Based on your load, you might need to tune them, and for tuning them uh, you would need to first understand your current usage, and then accordingly come up with an action plan for changing the XMX value for your environment. So that is one important part. So that is covered under part of another presentation we have, GC tuning for services. And beware while changing the advanced JVM option. Yeah, this is something which I have commonly seen in web access with customer, where we end up adding an unknown character or a new line character in the XMX or even in the JVM command line options, and end up causing the Java command to read it as end of line and terminate the command there itself. And because of that, most of the command line arguments are not passed to the Java process, and eventually it would fail to bring up the DIS. Next part would be ensure that the system has required ulimit and OS configurations. Yes, so before you make even install, you have to ensure that always your setup has the same required set of resource configurations, and the certified patches and certified ulimits are always to the mark, so that you do not face any issues because of resource crunch. Like say for example, you have your FD user limit set to 8K or something, and when the DS tries to come up, it would try to open a lot of files, and if the number of files is more than 8192, it would be stopped or it would be denied from opening it, and it would not be able to come up, ending up with a fatal error. Increase the logging severity to debug to capture additional informative messages during startup failure hang. Yeah, so this is another important thing which you can use for consistent issues, where you can debug by finding out what was the last message we see before we hang, or what are the last message we see before this error comes. So you can actually nail down those provide a basic very important clue about what is happening currently in the system. So these are all the referred KB articles in this presentation. I recommend you to have a walkthrough of those KB articles in your free time. Yeah. And of course, yeah, we would love to hear from you on, and any kind of videos you are looking for, you can actually mail them the subject with to supportvideos@informatica.com, and you can also tweet about it on twitter.com for info support. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you.